Berner Street was quiet that night. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your stomach tighten, because you know something is wrong long before you see it. It was late September 1888, and the air was damp with that slow, dreary drizzle London does so well. Most of Whitechapel slept. A few worked, some wandered. And one woman stood at the edge of a yard belonging to the International Working Men's Educational Club, a place where socialist politics, Yiddish debates and late-night songs mixed with tobacco smoke and candlelight. Her shawl pulled close against the rain, her hair damp, her eyes tired. But her posture still carried that unmistakable resilience, the resilience of a woman who has survived things most people would never speak aloud. That woman was Elizabeth Stride, and within the hour she would be found in that very yard, her life cut short in a way that would echo across the world. But tonight, we begin with the life that led her here, a life marked by migration, reinvention, struggle, dignity, and the heavy weight of being forgotten. Welcome back to the Eclectic. I'm your host, and tonight we continue our series, The Women of Whitechapel, a journey into the real lives behind the headlines, the myths, and the shadow of the man history chose to remember. Last time, we honoured Annie Chapman. Tonight, we turn to another woman whose story has been twisted, simplified, and dismissed for more than a century. This is Elizabeth Stride, a woman who crossed oceans, survived loss, held on to hope, and fought to define her identity in a city that tried at every turn to swallow her whole. In 1888, the world obsessed over the killer now called Jack the Ripper. But the truth is far simpler and far more tragic. He did not matter. They did. The women whose lives he intersected were not caricatures, not cautionary tales, not Victorian moral lessons. They were human beings, complicated, clever, stubborn, hopeful, fractured, and brave. Tonight we restore the voice of one such woman, a woman known to the newspapers simply as Long Liz. But she was more than that. Much, much more. Elizabeth Gustafsdotter was born on the 27th of November, 1843, on a small farm near Storel Tummelhed, a rural village within the parish of Torslanda, west of Gothenburg, Sweden. She was the second of 4 children of Gustav Eriksson and Anna Karlsdotter, both farm labourers, both poor, both living lives shaped by long days and harsh winters. Elizabeth grew up in a world of small wooden homes, rocky coastlines, Lutheran church bells, and fishing nets drying in the cold morning air. This was a tight-knit community that was centred around the Torslanda Church, one of the oldest churches. This was a community where everyone knew each other's business and where a young girl had 2 choices: marry early or work early. Elizabeth chose work. From a young age, she took domestic service, cleaning, cooking, laundering, the work expected of poor Swedish girls in the 19th century. Elizabeth relocated to Stora Tummelhed at about 16 years of age. There she was employed by a couple named Olofsson. She was described as very quiet, calm, and well-mannered, something that would later help her navigate London life. But there was another thread woven into her story, a yearning, a sense of wanting more than the narrow life Sweden offered poor women. And like many Scandinavian girls at the time, she looked outward, toward the ships, toward the ports, toward possibility, toward a new life in London. In February 1866, Elizabeth left Sweden. She boarded a ship heading for London, a journey young many Scandinavian women made in search of work and independence. We don't know every detail of her crossing. We don't really know her reasons for relocating. She did give acquaintances two differing stories as to why. In one story, she claims to have relocated due to her employment with a gentleman who lived near Hyde Park. In another story, she had claimed to have family who lived in London, and she had gone to visit them, and in the process had decided to stay in London. There is no definitive evidence for either story, but what we do know is this. Elizabeth arrived in London as part of a major migration wave of Swedish workers, all arriving, seeking a better life in Britain's booming industrial revolution, escaping Swedish poverty and the limited opportunities. They worked in wealthy homes, hospitals, laundries, factories, anywhere that needed strong hands and quiet women. Elizabeth was one of them. She worked. She learned English. She learned Yiddish. She adapted. On the 7th of March, 1869, Elizabeth married John Thomas Stride, a carpenter from Sheerness, who was 22 years her senior. He was steady, employed, rooted. Together, they ran a coffee house in Poplar, the Coffee Room, a respectable establishment. They were, for a time, prosperous. Elizabeth dressed well. She carried herself with confidence. She was not the destitute unfortunate newspapers later painted her as. But as we know, marriage is never simple, and this one began to strain. By 1874, the Strides' marriage had begun to deteriorate. John's health faltered. Elizabeth's drinking increased. Arguments followed. They separated, reconciled, separated again, and finally drifted into lives that ran parallel but no longer touched. When John died in 1884 of tuberculosis, Elizabeth lost not only her husband, but her financial safety net. Elizabeth Stride, perhaps in her misery, claimed, whilst asking for financial assistance from the Swedish Church, that she had lost her husband and 2 of her 9 children in the 1878 Princess Alice steamship disaster. This is where the Princess Alice collided with the Bywell Castle in the Thames. This was one of the worst maritime disasters in British history. 650 are believed to have drowned. Elizabeth claimed she had survived this disaster. She said she had lost her husband and 2 of her children that night. She said she was kicked in the mouth by a rescuer, which left her with a small scar. But here's the truth. None of it appears in official records. Not because she lied maliciously, but because trauma makes storytellers of us all. What we do know is that Elizabeth carried emotional wounds, and this story may have been her way of naming a grief she couldn't explain. She was, now a widow, alone in London, with no family here, no pension, no property, and health problems of her own. By the mid-1880s, Elizabeth's life had narrowed. She drifted through the lodging houses across Whitechapel. She worked when she could, sewing, cleaning, casual labour. Sometimes she sold flowers. Sometimes she relied on charitable shelters. Sometimes, when the night was cold and options few, she sold sex for the price of a bed. But she was not hardened, not cruel, not loud or violent. Descriptions of her at the time say she was quiet, respectable in manner, not a habitual prostitute, a woman who tried her best. And she did try. Whilst residing in common lodging houses, Elizabeth occasionally received charitable assistance from the Church of Sweden in London. She earned money from sewing, house cleaning, and sex work, Like Annie Chapman, it was a case of having to do this to earn money for a bed that night. But poverty is relentless. It does not let go easily. And by 1888, Elizabeth Stride, once the neatly dressed Swedish housemaid, was living night to night, shilling to shilling, in the dark corners of the East End. It is worth noting here that between 1885 and 1888, Elizabeth lived with a local dock labourer called Michael Kidney. The couple had a tumultuous relationship, regularly separating. Elizabeth's dependency on alcohol drove a wedge between them. She would have drinking benders, according to Kidney, and would disappear from home for several days or weeks before returning to him. It is also likely that there was physical abuse in their relationship. Domestic abuse was rampant in Victorian London. By the early evening of Saturday, the 29th of September, 1888, Elizabeth Stride was seen in several places across Whitechapel, each sighting offering fragments of a timeline that would later confound investigators. She was tired, she was unsteady, though not heavily drunk. She had been unwell that week, but she was, as always. Her last 24 hours begin with the Queen's Head public house. That day, Elizabeth had cleaned 2 rooms at her lodging house. She was paid 6pence by the housekeeper, Elizabeth Tanner. That evening, before she left, she wore a black jacket and skirt, with a posy of red rose on a spray. She complemented her outfit with a black crape bonnet, and at 6:30 p.m, Stride was seen at the Queen's Head pub drinking in the company of Elizabeth Tanner. She returned to her residence at about 7 p.m, where she borrowed a clothes brush from Charles Preston, a fellow lodger, to make her outfit look a little more respectable. At 7:30 p.m, after having chatted with Catherine Lane, another resident, Elizabeth left the lodgings and headed out into the dark streets of Whitechapel. The Bricklayer's Arms. Elizabeth was seen at around about 11 p.m. by 2 men, J. Best and John Gardner, sheltering from the heavy rain in the doorway of the Bricklayer's Arms. She was seen talking with a man described as 5'5", wearing a black morning suit and a billycock hat. The couple were seen hugging and kissing. J. Best and John Gardner joked that he was a leather apron, a local name for a suspicious character. Stride and the man hurried off to Commercial Street. There was nothing threatening, nothing unusual in these movements. The dark streets of Berner Street. Berner Street was not a dangerous place, as newspapers later claimed. It was a working-class, predominantly Jewish street, lively, political, noisy. But that night, something felt off. What follows now is the most carefully reconstructed timeline of any Whitechapel murder, and yet it is the most debated. We proceed here with caution. At 11:45 p.m, Elizabeth was seen with several different men between 11:45 and 1 a.m. At 11:45, a woman and a man were seen near 63 Berner Street by William Marshall. He said the couple were kissing and appeared sober. William described the man as middle-aged, stout, and respectably dressed like a clerk. The man said to the woman, "You would say anything but your prayers." William Marshall saw the couple walk off towards the direction of Dutfield's yard. Was this Elizabeth? Who was the man? There is no evidence this man was her killer, only that the night was already beginning to fracture. 12:35 a.m. P.C. William Smith. He saw Elizabeth walking with another man opposite the International Working Men's Educational Club. The man is described as being 28, with a dark complexion. He had a small moustache and was wearing a cutaway coat and dark trousers. Smith noticed that he was carrying a small package about 18 inches long, wrapped in newspaper. Stride showed no signs of distress, and there were no signs of danger. P.C. Smith continued on his beat, heading to Commercial Street, oblivious to the events that would soon unfold. 12:40 a.m. Dock worker James Brown saw a woman that he believed was Elizabeth, standing with her back against the corner of Berner Street, speaking with a man he describes as average build and a long black coat that reached his heels. His arm was against the wall. Brown heard the woman say, "No, not tonight, some other night." Was this Elizabeth? Brown did not see a red rose pinned to the woman's jacket. At 12:45 a.m. Israel Schwartz. One of the most sensational testimonies. Israel Schwartz was a Hungarian Jew who spoke very little English and happened to be turning into Berner Street from Commercial Road. He lived at 22 Helen Street, Backchurch. He was across the street from the gateway into Dutfield's yard, where later Elizabeth Stride's body will be found. Schwartz described seeing a violent altercation. A man tried to pull a woman into the street. When she resisted, he grabbed her and threw her to the ground and shouted Lipski, an anti-Jewish slur often used by street bullies. Schwartz also stated that he had seen a second man as he crossed the street. This man started following Schwartz, and in a panic, in fear, Schwartz ran away. He said later that he was unsure if the two men were together. He did describe the man who assaulted Elizabeth as tall with dark hair and a small brown moustache. Is this the same man seen earlier? Many historians still debate whether Schwartz actually saw Elizabeth or someone else entirely. The police believed that Schwartz had seen another couple and not Elizabeth Stride. Schwartz's account is dramatic and leaves you wondering, did he see Jack the Ripper? Between 1 a.m. and 1:05 a.m., Louis Diem Schwartz arrives. Diem Schwartz, a steward of the International Working Men's Educational Club, returned to Dutfield's yard from Westow Hill Market near Crystal Palace. As he turned his horse into the yard, the horse shied to the left suddenly and refused to go any further. Looking into the yard, Diem Schwartz saw a dark form lying on the ground close to the wall of the club. It looked like a bundle of rags. Leaning forward, he prodded it with his whip and tried to lift it. When this proved unsuccessful, he jumped down to investigate and struck a match to get a better view. It was windy that night, and the match was extinguished almost immediately. But in the brief seconds' flickering light, he saw that it wasn't rags. It was a woman on the ground. It was Elizabeth Stride. Diem Schwartz ran into the club and told several members, "There's a woman lying in the yard, and I cannot say whether she is drunk or dead." Returning to the yard with other members, Diem Schwartz took a lighted candle and moved closer to the woman. It is here that he noticed there was blood by the body, and those present winced in horror when they saw that her throat had been cut. There was no mutilation. Her throat was cut deeply, but nothing more. This has led to a powerful theory that the killer was interrupted. Dr. Frederick William Blackwell was the first doctor to arrive on the scene, followed 10 minutes later by Dr. George Baxter Phillips, who had previously examined the other Ripper victims. The scene was unlike the previous Ripper attack. Elizabeth's body was positioned on her side, knees tucked as though she'd been gently lowered, her face turned toward the wall, the head facing toward the yard, and her feet pointing toward the street. Her left arm was extended, and there she was still clutching a packet of throat lozenges. There was one clean, forceful incision to the throat, no abdominal mutilation, no post-mortem injuries. Her clothing, tidy, not disordered, not torn aside. Whoever killed her acted quickly, decisively, and was interrupted before he could continue. Elizabeth's death was violent, but fast. The violence she endured in life lasted much longer. The police descended rapidly. They searched the crime scene. They interrogated everyone at the International Working Men's Club. Statements were taken from all the residents in the area. One resident, Fanny Mortimer, who lived 2 doors down from the club, saw a man with a shiny black bag race past at about the time it is believed Stride was murdered. Theories blossomed, contradictions multiplied. The key conclusions from the investigators: Elizabeth Stride was deliberately murdered. The killer likely had blood on his hands, but not much else. He was interrupted by the arrival of Louis Diemschultz. Elizabeth may not have been a Ripper victim in the classic sense, or she may have been the only one he didn't have time to mutilate. Her missing possessions? Likely taken by local thieves after death, a common tragedy in the East End. Elizabeth Stride's murder is the most disputed of the canonical 5. Reasons against the Ripper inclusion: lack of mutilation. The murder took place south of Whitechapel Road. Only her throat had been cut. The blade used to cut Stride's throat is thought to be smaller and of a different design. Possibly could have been a gang or domestic violence attack, perhaps carried out by her on-again, off-again lover, Michael Kidney, mistaken for Ripper murder. Reasons for inclusion: general physical and lifestyle characteristics. Throat cut in classic Ripper fashion. The timing fits within the pattern. The murder location. The next murder, Catherine Eddowes, had occurred less than an hour later. The killer may have been frustrated by interruption, and the same geographical hunting ground. The modern consensus is that Elizabeth Stride is part of the canonical 5, but she represents an interrupted attack, not a full one. It's firmly believed that he was interrupted when Diemschultz's horse and cart entered the yard, and that perhaps he was still in the yard when Diemschultz ran into the club and using that opportunity to escape into the night. Elizabeth's case is a reminder that real life is not neat, real violence is not predictable, and human suffering rarely fits into patterns. Elizabeth Stride was buried on the 6th of October 1888 in the East London Cemetery, Plaistow. No one had come forward to claim her body. Her funeral was quiet. No friends, no family to mourn. She was buried in a pauper's grave. The undertaker, Mr. George C. Hawkes, covered the cost of the simple funeral. She left behind no children, no wealth, no letters, no possessions. But she left a story, a human story, a story of survival, migration, resilience, and hope, and a world that gave her so little in return. When we speak her name now, we give her the dignity she was denied in life, and the respect she was denied in the press. Elizabeth Stride mattered. Her life mattered. Her struggle mattered. Thank you for joining me for this chapter of The Women of Whitechapel. Elizabeth Stride's story is quieter than the others, less dramatic, less sensational, but it is no less important. Next time, we follow the night further, to Mitre Square, to another woman whose life intersected with violence on that same night. Join me as we honour Catherine Eddowes. Until then, stay curious, stay compassionate, and as always, stay eclectic.